Did you hear anything about who found him, how he was found, or the 911 call or anything like that?
Yes.
Yeah?
And I can't talk about it.
Did you ever have any signs of abuse? Did you ever see any signs of abuse with him lately that would end up in something like this?
No, not at all.
Sheila E. just revealed Prince's final words, and they weren't about music, they were about Diddy.
The first Diddy party I went to was at Prince's house. So you want to go to Prince's house to the Diddy party where Tyrese is performing and Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher are swinging on swings. That is what's happening on the other side of the wall.
For years, people thought Prince's biggest war was over ownership, his name, his masters, his legacy. But near the end of his life, he started pointing fingers at real people who were playing God with artists' lives. One of those names, according to sources closest to him, was Sean Diddy Combs.
What jurors heard today were tales of appalling physical by Sean Combs as prosecutors portrayed him as a who controlled people and plied them with threats, money.
And now, as Diddy faces federal charges for abuse, coercion, and manipulation, Sheila E. is finally confirming what Prince tried to warn us about before he died. He saw it coming. Now, years later, that warning is finally starting to make sense. Before Prince died, before the media storm and sealed documents, before the pills and the elevator, Sheila E. knew something was wrong. Not with his health, not with his fame, with the world around him.
Did you ever have any signs of abuse? Did you ever see any signs of abuse with him lately that would end up in something like this?
No, not at all.
The story of Sheila E. and Prince goes back to 1977.
We met in 77, I think, somewhere around there. First, my dad had seen him before I did. My dad was recording with Carlos Santana in the studio when Prince came to the Bay Area to be in the studio where Carlos played and Sly Stone.
By 1984, she was signed to Warner Bros. And collaborating with Prince on her debut solo album, The Glamorous Life. That same year, she joined him on the Purple Rain Tour, becoming one of the closest people in his orbit. Their connection wasn't just musical, it was personal, romantic even.
Sometimes we'd open our eyes and forget that we were in front of 20, 30,000 people. And at that particular time, as I opened my eyes, I looked at him. At the same time, he looked at me and he asked me to marry him at that exact moment.
It happened live, on stage, during the Sign of the Times tour. Prince looked at her mid-performance and without rehearsal, without setup, mouthed the words, "Will you marry me?" It was never a publicity stunt. It was real. But like most things in Prince's life, it didn't last. By the time he died in 2016, many believed they hadn't spoken in years, largely due to tension from Sheila's autobiography. But according to sources close to her, that's not the truth. They had reconnected. And it was in those final moments that Prince allegedly told her everything. Prince had spent years warning artists about the control labels had over them, how the business was built on modern-day slavery. He talked about how some celebrities weren't just part of the machine, they were the machine. He told Sheila that Diddy was helping to build a new version of what he had fought his whole life to destroy. And Sheila didn't fully understand it at the time. She stayed quiet, even as people speculated. But something changed when Diddy's name started showing up in federal indictments, when Cassie's court testimony began surfacing, and when Prince's own name came up in that testimony. It was no longer just a personal story. It was evidence. And Sheila knew it was time to speak. She started small, public interviews where she mentioned that Prince had been carrying a heavy burden, but close friends knew what that burden was. He wasn't just warning people about shady contracts. He believed something was coming for him. And with what we now know from the trial, everything Sheila hinted at is finally aligning with the timeline of Prince's death. The silence is over. The burden Prince carried is now being passed on to the world. Prince wasn't paranoid. He was ahead of his time. His biggest battle wasn't just with record labels. It was with the people who quietly upheld them. And near the end of his life, Prince became convinced that one of the most dangerous figures in the music business was none other than Sean Diddy Combs. What had Prince so worried wasn't just Diddy's success or influence. It was who Diddy was aligning with and how those alignments were affecting the structure of the entire music business.
They've been a group. Everybody knows that. They've been aligned. Stand against them, then they sometimes have a problem.
His feud with Warner Music Group had defined much of his career. Signed at just 18, Prince spent years fighting for the rights to his own name, image, and catalog. Even as he rose to superstardom, Warner kept him locked into restrictive contracts. That frustration eventually led him to write the word slave across his face and abandon his own stage name, choosing instead to be represented by a symbol. To Prince, it was the only way to sever ties from an industry he believed was profiting off his existence. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was trying to teach a lesson that owning your masters, your work, and your identity was the only way to survive the system. Then came Diddy. In the early 2000s, Warner struck a new deal, this time with Bad Boy Records. Under that arrangement, Warner held a 50% stake in Diddy's label, handling global distribution for artists like Mace, Mario Winans, and the notorious B.I.G.'s posthumous releases. What Warner took from Prince, they gave freely to Diddy, and Prince saw it for what it was, the same trap, dressed in different branding. Diddy positioned himself as a mogul who beat the system, but Prince believed he had simply become part of it. And worse, he was helping to build a more powerful, more manipulative version of the very machine Prince had spent decades trying to expose. Prince began calling the industry a modern-day plantation. He said most artists would never own their music. They'd be used, chewed up, and tossed aside.
Well, it's not your game. You didn't make the rules, so everything comes hard. And as long as you're signed to a contract, you're going to take a minority share of the winnings. A select few of us will do well. The majority will not.
Prince watched as artists under Diddy's wing were dropped after nervous breakdowns, rushed back into the studio after family deaths, and left behind when they no longer served a profit. He knew what this meant, that power, when handed to people like Diddy, didn't uplift the community. It replicated the same with fewer rules and more silence. He believed Diddy was no longer just part of the industry. He was helping to redesign it. And the new version wasn't built on music. It was built on control, on NDAs, on silence, on fear. That's why Prince began hosting his own events, his own parties, his own protected spaces for artists. He called them his own game, a direct challenge to the corporate structure.
To mark the release of his new album, 3121, Prince rolled down the hill from his Hollywood mansion to play a live show at Tower Records on world-famous Sunset Boulevard.
In one of his last speeches, Prince told a crowd to imagine what it would be like if artists controlled everything: the music, the message, the money. He wanted people to see their worth outside of the label system. He wanted independence to be the new standard, but he also knew it came with a price. Just before he died, Prince posted a cryptic image with a haunting caption, "Just when you thought you were safe." It was deleted not long after, but the warning stayed with those who followed his career closely. He knew something was coming, something beyond contracts and lawsuits. And now, as federal investigations tear open the hidden corners of the music industry, his warnings make more sense than ever. Prince believed that Diddy wasn't just an executive. He was a gatekeeper, one with enough access, protection, and resources to silence anyone who got in the way. And Prince? He wasn't just in the way. He was the one trying to burn the whole thing down. Prince saw control taking a new shape, and he saw who was driving it. He no longer viewed Diddy as just another label exec. He saw him as part of a network replicating the same industry abuses, but with more secrecy, more pressure, and far less accountability. That's why Prince separated himself. He built a new system, his own game. He created his own events, guarded his circle, and drew lines that couldn't be crossed. But one night, at one of those carefully protected events, those lines were crossed. And it wasn't Prince who did it. It was Diddy. And Cassie was caught in the middle. It was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, an invitation into Prince's world. Not a tour stop, not an award show, but his actual home, his sanctuary. For Cassie, it was a rare opportunity to escape the control she lived under daily and see the kind of creative freedom Prince represented. But what was meant to be a night of peace turned into one of panic. Cassie testified in court that she didn't tell Diddy about the party because she knew he wouldn't allow it. She said he controlled where she went, who she saw, and how she moved. But this was Prince, a man who stood for everything Diddy tried to suppress. She went anyway. The moment she walked in, everything seemed normal. She saw industry figures, BET executives, people laughing, dancing, talking. But not long after, she was told Diddy had arrived. And just like that, the entire mood changed. Cassie didn't stop to think. She ran. "I caught a glimpse of him, left the party, and ran out as fast as I could," Ventura testified. "I knew he was angry at me." She later said she caught a glimpse of Diddy's face and knew exactly what that look meant. She had seen it before. It was a look that came before something violent. She fled the scene, made it back to her hotel, and locked herself in. But that wasn't the end. Hours later, Diddy showed up at her room, burst through the door, and according to her sworn statement, beat her. He threw luggage at her, screamed, accused her of betrayal, all because she went somewhere he didn't approve of. All because it was Prince's house. That's what made it more than just a domestic dispute. This wasn't about jealousy. It was about control. And the space she entered symbolized everything Diddy couldn't dominate. Prince's home wasn't just another celebrity mansion. It was a rejection of the entire system Diddy embodied. And Diddy showing up there, that was no coincidence. That was intrusion. Prince had created those spaces to be safe. No exploitation, no pressure, no hidden cameras, no manipulation. His 3121 parties were invite only for a reason. He understood what too many artists learned too late, that in the industry, even a party could be a trap. His events were meant to be a sanctuary. But when Diddy arrived, he brought that trap with him. And Cassie's flight from the scene wasn't just instinct. It was evidence. She knew what would happen. She knew the cost. And now, with Prince's name brought up in court as part of Cassie's testimony, the world is seeing what he tried to warn everyone about. Diddy didn't just try to take control of artists' music. He tried to control their movements, their minds, even their sense of safety. For Prince, that night confirmed his fears. His enemy wasn't just the industry. It was those who used its power to terrorize others. And Cassie? She didn't just witness it. She lived it. What Cassie didn't know that night, what she couldn't have known, was that she had stepped into the center of a quiet war Prince had been fighting for years. That moment at his house wasn't just a confrontation between two people. It was a collision of two worlds, one built on fear and control, and the other built on boundaries, resistance, and freedom. Prince saw it all. The violence, the manipulation, the takeover. And shortly after that, something in him changed. He tightened security at Paisley Park. He started restricting access to people he'd once welcomed with open arms. He cut off longtime friends, refused to attend industry events, and began speaking in riddles. Cryptic lines dropped in public appearances that didn't make sense at the time, but now read like warnings.
You know, that also really concerned me because it made me think that, wow, so you mean you do all these things to take care of yourself and you die so young?
Just days before his death, Prince told people at a party, "Wait a few days before you waste any prayers." At the time, it sounded strange, even morbid. But after everything that's surfaced since, after the allegations, the testimonies, the federal investigation, it sounds like a man who already knew what was coming. And it wasn't just what he said, it was how he moved. He stopped trusting the people around him. He implemented stricter guest lists. He made sure no one showed up unannounced. Prince had always been protective of his space, but near the end, he became paranoid, not about fans, not about fame, about the people he believed were working behind the scenes to shut him down. People who moved in silence, controlled narratives, and used fame as a weapon. And if there's one name he kept circling back to, one figure that kept coming up, it was Diddy. For years, Prince had watched what Diddy was doing to artists. He saw the contracts, the manipulation, the culture of silence. But what scared him most wasn't what was happening in the studio. It was what was happening outside of it. He started warning friends that some of the biggest names in the industry were holding private events where young artists were being manipulated and filmed. He called it modern-day slavery with a modern twist, blackmail, NDAs, and total erasure of identity. Not just about stealing your art, about stealing your freedom. Prince was no stranger to being watched, but in those final months, he moved like a man being hunted, like he had something on the wrong person. Or maybe he just knew too much. Even those close to him said his behavior shifted. He spoke in layers. He avoided certain subjects, and he made it clear he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being silenced. And when the coroner ruled his death an accidental overdose from fentanyl-laced pills, not everyone believed it. Friends said he didn't do. His closest collaborators said the narrative didn't fit the man they knew. The official story felt too convenient, too fast, too clean. The pills, the deleted messages, the sealed documents, the people who suddenly stopped talking. It all felt like closure without clarity. And when Sheila E finally opened up years later, it didn't sound like she was grieving a random tragedy. It sounded like she was unburdening a truth that had been haunting her, a truth that Prince left with her because he couldn't say it out loud. He knew the machine wouldn't let him. That's why his final words weren't about his legacy. legacy. They were about what he saw coming, about the takeover, about the people in the room, about the ones who didn't make music. They made silence. And Diddy? He wasn't just part of the system. Prince believed he was one of the reasons the system kept getting worse. By the time Prince was withdrawing from the public eye and setting stricter boundaries around Paisley Park, he wasn't just trying to protect his legacy. He was trying to protect people. Everything about his private gatherings changed in those last years. His infamous 3121 parties weren't like anything happening in the rest of the music industry. No guest list packed with influencers, no pressure, no cameras, just artists creating, talking, healing. For Prince, these weren't just parties, they were sanctuaries. He knew what the other side looked like. While Prince built spaces of intention, Diddy was reportedly building something else entirely, so-called freak-offs, secret invitation-only events where, according to multiple lawsuits and witness statements, were distributed, guests were filmed without consent, and young artists were manipulated into silence through intimidation and fear. These weren't just parties, they were traps, and the people invited weren't always there willingly. Prince had heard the rumors, he'd seen the patterns, and he understood that these weren't isolated incidents. They were an infrastructure, a network where exploitation was packaged as opportunity, and he wanted no part of it. But the thing is, he couldn't ignore it either. In recent years, those close to Prince began to speak more openly. They said he kept receipts, that he recorded who entered his parties and who tried to use them as recruiting grounds. They said Prince was aware of a game being played, and he made it his mission to make sure no one played it under his roof. At the same time, he knew his parties were being watched. He knew industry insiders wanted in, not for the art, but for the influence. And so, he made 3121 a fortress. It wasn't about exclusivity, it was about safety, a place where artists didn't have to trade dignity for fame. And that's what made Prince a problem, because by creating something honest, he was exposing everything fake. By giving people a way out, he was interfering with someone else's control, and that made him a target. Even Cat Williams, someone Prince quietly mentored, later said Prince warned him about certain figures in the industry, not just labels, not just CEOs, names, people who were building something bigger than contracts, people who were creating leverage through footage, favors, secrets, and shame. The deeper Prince got into his own movement, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about blackmail, about silence, about who got to tell the story and who didn't live long enough to. And maybe that's why Prince was becoming more vocal. Maybe that's why he pushed back so hard when companies like Roc Nation reportedly came after his unreleased vault catalog. Maybe that's why he warned the public with cryptic messages like, "Just when you thought you were safe," because he knew that once you stepped into those rooms, you didn't walk out the same. He tried to fight it with music, with community, with parties that felt like freedom. But in doing that, he crossed an invisible line, because while the rest of the industry built ladders with favors, Prince was burning bridges that connected to something much darker. And when Cassie's story resurfaced, when she said she fled from a party at Prince's house because she found out Diddy was there, it became clear Prince's world was never meant to mix with Diddy's. One was built on escape, the other on entrapment. And when you put those two forces in the same room, something had to give. Prince spent his final years trying to create an alternative, not a label, not a brand, a reality where artists could exist without exploitation. But in doing so, he became a threat to people who relied on that exploitation to stay powerful. His death may have silenced the man, but the message, it's finally being heard. When Prince died, the official story was quick, clinical, and unchallenged. A tragic accident, a mix-up with painkillers, the end of a musical genius. But now, with everything that's come to light, Diddy's federal trial, Cassie's testimony, the sealed NDAs, the resurfaced footage, the growing list of artists speaking out, it's harder to pretend that's all there was. Because Prince wasn't just a man who made music. He was a man who documented what was happening to other musicians. He spent years trying to expose the system. And when he realized the system had adapted, when it started wearing familiar faces, he tried to warn us. He did it through speeches, through interviews, through cryptic posts, and guarded conversations. And he left pieces of that warning with the few people he still trusted. Sheila E was one of them, Cat Williams, possibly another. But the story Prince died with, it's not buried anymore. It's unraveling in courtrooms. It's echoing through testimonies. It's showing up in lawsuits, headlines, and redacted contracts. And every time another celebrity is named, every time another victim comes forward, it gets clearer. Prince wasn't scared for himself. He was scared for the ones who didn't see it coming. He built sanctuaries to protect them. He spoke in code to protect himself. And in the end, he paid the price for knowing too much. But now, we know too. And once you see what Prince was fighting against, you'll never look at Diddy the same way again. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.